The winter of 1880s Montana had a way of making the world feel smaller. Snow covered the mountains, buried the narrow trails, and stretched across the open plains like an endless white sheet. The wind came hard from the north, slipping through cracks in wooden walls and rattling every window of the isolated Reed Ranch. For Thomas Reed, 42, winter was more than a season. It was a threat. He stood outside the barn before sunrise, his wool coat pulled tightly around his shoulders, watching his breath disappear into the frozen air. 3 cattle had died during the previous week. The hay supply was shrinking faster than he had expected, and a section of the barn roof had begun leaking after the last storm. Thomas looked toward the house. Behind those walls was the only thing he cared about more than the ranch, his 8-year-old daughter, Emily Reed. Since her mother's death 2 years earlier, Emily had changed. She had once been a lively child who chased chickens through the yard and laughed whenever her father pretended to be angry with her. Now she rarely laughed at all. She ate little. She spoke even less. And whenever Thomas looked into her pale face, he saw the same emptiness that lived inside his own heart. He had tried to be both father and mother, but a ranch could not wait for grief to pass. Animals needed feeding. Fences needed repairing. Firewood needed chopping. Bills needed paying. Thomas had done his best. His best was simply no longer enough. Inside the kitchen, Emily sat quietly beside the cold window, wrapped in a faded wool shawl. Her small hands rested around a cup of warm milk. Thomas entered and placed another log on the fire. "You need to drink that," he said gently. Emily nodded. She did not look at him. Thomas sighed and sat across from her. "Feeling any better today?" Another small nod. He knew she was only saying yes because she did not want him to worry. Thomas reached across the table and touched her forehead. "Still cold. Too cold." He pulled his hand away and looked toward the nearly empty wood box. Another problem. Everything seemed to be running out at once. Food, firewood, money, time. Thomas had inherited the ranch from his father, along with a modest herd and a stubborn belief that the land could support a family if a man worked hard enough. But his father had never imagined a winter like this one, nor had he imagined Thomas would one day have to face it alone. There was also the debt. Thomas owed money to Caleb Dawson, 50, the wealthiest landowner in the area. Caleb owned hundreds of acres and had spent years expanding his holdings by purchasing struggling ranches. Thomas had refused every offer Caleb made. But refusal was becoming harder when there was barely enough money left to buy flour. That afternoon, Thomas rode into the nearest settlement to purchase supplies. The trip itself took nearly 2 hours through heavy snow. At the general store, he counted the coins in his palm twice before approaching the counter. The shopkeeper looked at him. "That all you have?" Thomas nodded. The man glanced at the small pile of coins and then at Thomas. "It won't buy much." "I know." Thomas purchased flour, beans, lamp oil, and a small amount of medicine for Emily. When he stepped outside, Caleb Dawson was waiting near the hitching rail. Caleb wore an expensive black coat lined with fur. His horse was strong and well-fed, unlike the tired animals Thomas had left at home. "You look tired, Reed," Caleb said. Thomas ignored the remark. "I don't have time for this." Caleb smiled. "That's exactly why I'm here." Thomas stopped. Caleb slowly removed his gloves. "You know your payment is due." "I know. And I also know your cattle losses." Thomas's jaw tightened. "I'll pay you. Will you?" Caleb looked toward the snow-covered road. "Or will you lose the ranch first?" Thomas stared at him. Caleb had made the same offer 3 times already. Sell the ranch. Pay the debt. Walk away. Thomas had refused every time. "This land isn't for sale." Caleb smiled again. "Everything is for sale when a man gets desperate enough." Thomas mounted his horse without answering. He rode home through the gathering darkness. By the time he reached the ranch, snow was already falling harder. Emily was asleep beside the fireplace. Thomas covered her with a blanket and stood watching her for several minutes. He wanted to promise her that everything would be fine, but he could not make promises he wasn't sure he could keep. That night, the storm became violent. The wind howled around the house. Snow struck the windows like handfuls of sand. Thomas checked the horses, secured the barn doors, and returned to the house just before midnight. Then he heard something. A knock. Thomas froze. Nobody came to the ranch in weather like this. He reached for the rifle beside the door. Another knock came, louder this time. Thomas slowly opened the door. A woman stood outside. She was barely visible through the snow. Her dark hair was covered with ice. Her wool coat was soaked, and one hand clutched a small, worn travel bag against her chest. She looked exhausted. Thomas immediately stepped outside. "Miss?" The woman lifted her face. "My name is Anna Carter." Her voice trembled. "I need somewhere to stay." Thomas looked past her toward the empty road. "There isn't anywhere else." "I know. You'll freeze if you keep walking." "I know that too." Thomas hesitated. Anna's lips were pale from the cold. He opened the door wider. "Come inside." She stepped across the threshold. For several moments, she simply stood near the fire, trembling. Thomas closed the door behind her. Emily woke at the sound. She appeared at the top of the stairs wearing her nightdress and holding the wooden railing. Anna looked up. Their eyes met. Something changed in Anna's expression. It was not pity. It was recognition. She seemed to understand immediately that the little girl had been carrying a sadness much too large for her age. Thomas noticed the look. "This is my daughter, Emily." Anna gave the girl a small smile. "Hello, Emily." Emily said nothing. Thomas turned back toward Anna. "You can stay tonight." Anna nodded gratefully. "But I need to be clear," he continued. "I don't have money to pay anyone. I didn't ask for money." Thomas frowned. "Then what do you want?" Anna looked toward Emily. "I can cook." Thomas remained silent. "I can clean. I can sew. I can work. Everyone says they can work." Anna looked directly at him. Then she said quietly, "Let me stay? I'll care for your daughter." Thomas did not answer. The words caught him completely off guard. "You don't know her." "No." "You don't know me." "No." "Then why?" Anna looked at Emily again. "Because she looks like a child who needs someone." Thomas felt something tighten inside his chest. He looked at his daughter. Emily was still standing on the stairs. For the first time in months, there was a tiny spark of curiosity in her eyes. Thomas lowered the rifle. "There's a spare room." Anna nodded. "Thank you." The next morning, Thomas woke before sunrise expecting to find Anna gone. Instead, he smelled something he had not smelled in weeks. Fresh bread. He entered the kitchen and found Anna preparing breakfast. Emily was sitting at the table, and beside her was the wooden doll Thomas's late wife had made for her. The doll's torn dress had been carefully repaired. Thomas stared. Anna noticed him. Thomas shook his head. "No." Emily looked down at the doll. "She fixed Mama's dress." Thomas swallowed. Anna quietly returned to the stove. She did not ask questions about Emily's mother. She did not try to force herself into the family's grief. She simply worked. Over the next several days, Thomas began noticing small changes. Emily started eating. "I hope you don't mind." More. She sat closer to the fire. She listened when Anna read aloud. One afternoon, Thomas returned from the barn and heard laughter. He stopped outside the door. It was Emily. A real laugh. Thomas stood completely still. He could not remember the last time he had heard it. Inside, Anna was teaching Emily how to braid a piece of wool. Emily looked up and saw her father. Her smile disappeared from embarrassment. Thomas smiled. "Don't stop." Emily looked surprised. Then she smiled again. That evening, Thomas sat across from Anna at the kitchen table. "I don't understand you," he admitted. Anna looked up. "What do you mean? You came here with nothing." "Yes." "You don't know how long you'll be able to stay." "I know. And you still decided to help." Anna lowered her eyes. "Sometimes a person doesn't need much to be useful." Thomas looked at her carefully. He wanted to ask what had brought her to his door in the middle of a Montana winter. But something in her expression told him she was not ready to answer. So he did not ask. Outside, the wind began rising again. Anna glanced toward the window. "That barn won't survive another storm." Thomas looked at her. "What?" "The roof." "I know." "No," she said quietly. "I mean the support beam on the western side is cracked." Thomas stared at her. "How do you know that?" "I noticed it yesterday." Thomas stood. He had worked that ranch for 15 years. He had not noticed. Anna continued. "If the wind comes from the west, the whole section could collapse." Thomas looked through the window toward the dark barn. Then he looked back at Anna. For the first time, he began to wonder if the woman who had arrived at his door asking for shelter might have been the answer to a problem he had been too exhausted to solve. Neither of them knew it yet. But the decision Thomas had made that freezing night would soon determine whether the Reed Ranch survived the winter. The next morning, Thomas woke before dawn. For a few seconds, he lay still beneath the heavy quilt, listening to the wind scrape against the walls. Then he remembered Anna's warning. The barn. Thomas dressed quickly and stepped outside. The cold struck his face like a blade. He crossed the yard through knee-deep snow, and entered the barn. Anna had been right. The western support beam was badly cracked. Thomas stared at it in disbelief. One more heavy storm could bring the entire section of the roof down. He ran a hand across his beard. How did I miss this? Behind him, Anna appeared carrying a lantern. You've had too much on your mind. Thomas turned. You noticed it in one day. Anna shrugged. I've spent most of my life noticing things people overlook. Thomas studied her for a moment. There was something behind those words. Something she was not telling him. But he said nothing. Instead, they spent the morning reinforcing the barn. Anna held the lantern while Thomas replaced the damaged support with a spare beam. She worked without complaint despite the freezing temperature, her fingers red from the cold. By midday, the worst of the danger had been contained. Thomas looked at the repaired beam. You saved me from losing half the barn. Anna smiled faintly. Then I suppose I earned my breakfast. Thomas laughed. It was the first time Anna had heard him laugh. For a moment, the ranch did not feel quite so lonely. Inside the house, Emily was waiting. Anna had prepared porridge. Emily pushed the bowl away. I don't want it. Anna sat beside her. You don't have to eat all of it. Emily shook her head. I don't want anything. Thomas stood near the doorway. He had seen this before. After her mother died, Emily had stopped caring about food, toys, games, even the horses she once loved. Anna did something Thomas had never thought to do. She picked up a spoon and took a small bite from Emily's bowl. Not bad. Emily looked at her. Anna took another bite. A little too much salt, perhaps. Emily's lips twitched. Thomas watched. Anna handed her the spoon. You tell me. Emily hesitated. Then she tasted it. Her face changed. Too much salt. Anna nodded solemnly. I knew it. Emily giggled. Thomas turned away so neither of them would see the emotion in his eyes. Over the following weeks, Anna became part of the rhythm of the ranch. She woke before sunrise, helped Thomas feed the livestock, prepared meals, repaired clothes, and kept the house warm. But her greatest work was with Emily. She never tried to replace Emily's mother. She simply gave the girl permission to be a child again. They made paper birds from old flour sacks. They baked bread. They walked through the snow when the weather allowed it. And at night, Anna read stories beside the fire. Emily slowly began talking again. One evening, she asked Anna, Do you think Mama can see us? Anna paused. Thomas, sitting nearby, looked up. Anna answered carefully, I think the people who love us never really leave us. Emily thought about that. Then she knows I'm happy? Anna smiled. I think she'd be very happy. Thomas lowered his eyes. For years, he had avoided talking about his wife because every memory hurt. Anna had somehow made the memory gentle. But while warmth returned to the house, danger was growing outside it. One morning, Anna discovered something strange near the northern fence. Several posts had been cut, not broken by snow. Cut. She crouched beside one and touched the fresh wood. Thomas came over. What happened? Someone did this. Thomas looked at the fence. The storm. Anna shook her head. Snow doesn't make straight cuts. Thomas's expression hardened. Did you see anyone? No. He followed the fence line. Several more posts had been damaged. That evening, Thomas rode into town to buy supplies. When he returned, Caleb Dawson was waiting near the ranch gate. Thomas dismounted. What do you want? Caleb smiled. I heard you've taken in a stranger. Thomas said nothing. She seems capable. She is. Caleb's eyes narrowed slightly. You should be careful. Of what? People who arrive with no past. Thomas stepped closer. Anna has done more for my daughter in 3 weeks than most people have done in 2 years. Caleb laughed softly. That's not what I meant. Thomas stared at him. Caleb leaned closer. I know where she came from. Thomas's expression changed. What are you talking about? Ask her. Then Caleb mounted his horse and rode away. Thomas watched him disappear into the snow. That night, he said nothing to Anna. Not yet. But the words stayed in his mind. Where did she come from? Why had she arrived alone? And what was she running from? Several days later, Emily became sick. At first it was only a cough. By evening, she was burning with fever. Thomas panicked. The nearest doctor was miles away, and the roads were nearly impossible to travel. He tried everything he knew. Nothing worked. Anna remained beside Emily's bed. She's frightened, Anna said. Thomas stood helplessly near the door. She needs a doctor. I know. What if? Thomas couldn't finish. Anna looked at him. Don't give her your fear. Thomas closed his eyes. Anna spent the entire night caring for Emily. She cooled the girl's forehead, changed the blankets, kept the fire burning, and whispered reassuring words whenever Emily woke. Thomas remained nearby. Near dawn, Emily opened her eyes. "Papa." Thomas rushed to her. "I'm here." Emily looked toward Anna. "Don't go." Anna took her hand. "I'm not going anywhere." Thomas looked away. The words struck him harder than he expected. By morning, Emily's fever had begun to fall. Thomas stepped outside. He stood alone in the snow, breathing deeply. For the first time since his wife died, he realized he was not carrying everything alone. But then he heard hoofbeats. Caleb had returned. This time, he did not come alone. He stopped several yards from the house. "Reed." Thomas walked toward him. "What?" Caleb's expression was cold. "You need to send that woman away." Thomas stiffened. "You've said enough." "No, you haven't heard everything." Caleb pulled a folded paper from his coat. "Anna Carter worked for the Bell family 2 years ago." Thomas stared at the paper. "She was accused of stealing money." Thomas's stomach tightened. "That isn't true. You don't know that." Caleb handed him the paper. "She disappeared before the matter could be settled." Thomas looked at the document. There was Anna's name. The accusation was written clearly. He felt betrayed. Not because he believed it. Because she had never told him. That evening, Thomas waited until Emily was asleep. Then he found Anna in the kitchen. "Why didn't you tell me?" Anna stopped. "Tell you what." He placed the paper on the table. Anna looked at it. Her face went pale. For several seconds, she said nothing. Finally, she sat down. "I didn't steal anything." Thomas remained standing. "Then why did you leave?" "Because nobody believed me." Her voice trembled. "I worked for the Bell family. Their money disappeared. The easiest person to blame was the woman with no family, no money, and no one powerful enough to defend her." Thomas's anger softened slightly. "What happened to the money?" "I never found out." "Then why is Caleb showing me this?" Anna looked at him. "Because he wants me gone." Thomas frowned. "Why?" "Because he knows I won't leave quietly." Anna finally revealed that she had once worked near Caleb's property. She had seen his men buying struggling ranches through threats and dishonest deals. She had refused to help them manipulate another family into selling their land. After that, Caleb began spreading rumors about her. Thomas understood. Caleb wasn't interested in Anna. Anna because of her past. He was afraid of what she knew. Thomas picked up the paper. "Why come here?" Anna looked toward Emily's room. "Because I needed somewhere nobody knew me." Thomas was silent. Anna stood. "If you want me to leave, I will." Thomas looked at her. Then he remembered Emily's fever. The repair doll. The barn. The food Anna had stretched for weeks. The laughter that had returned to his daughter's voice. He slowly shook his head. "No." Anna looked surprised. "You stay?" Her eyes filled with tears. Thomas continued. "I don't care what Caleb says. I'll judge you by what I've seen." For the first time since arriving at the ranch, Anna allowed herself to cry. Thomas did not know what to say, so he simply remained beside her. Outside, the wind began to rise. The following morning, they discovered that the livestock gate had been opened during the night. Several cattle were missing. Thomas followed the tracks into the snow. They led toward the northern boundary, toward Caleb's land. Then another storm arrived. The sky turned black before noon. Anna looked toward the barn. "This one will be worse." Thomas nodded. They worked together to secure everything. Windows were boarded. Animals were moved into the strongest section of the barn. Firewood was brought inside. Emily was kept close to the fireplace. By sunset, the blizzard had swallowed the ranch. The wind screamed around the buildings. The barn shook. Thomas went outside to check the livestock. Anna grabbed his arm. "Don't go alone." "I have to." "Then I'm coming." Thomas looked at her. "You could die out there." Anna tightened her coat. "So could you." They stepped into the storm together. Neither knew that before morning, they would discover just how far someone was willing to go to destroy the Reed Ranch. And neither knew that the secret beneath the snow would soon change everything. The blizzard came harder than either Thomas or Anna had expected. Snow swept across the ranch so thickly that the house disappeared behind a wall of white. The wind screamed through the gaps between the buildings, and every few seconds the old barn groaned beneath the weight of ice. Thomas tied a rope around his waist and secured the other end to the barn door. Anna watched him. "Don't go farther than the rope." Thomas nodded. "You stay inside." Anna shook her head. "You know I won't." Before Thomas could argue, a violent gust struck the barn. The western doors flew open. Several frightened cattle pushed toward the opening. Thomas rushed forward. "Close the gate." Anna grabbed the rope and followed him. Together, they fought against the wind. Thomas pulled the animals back while Anna slammed the heavy gate shut. One frightened horse kicked at the wooden wall. "Easy," Anna whispered. She moved toward it slowly, speaking softly until the animal calmed. Thomas looked at her through the blowing snow. Even now, she wasn't afraid. Or perhaps she was afraid and simply refused to let fear control her. They managed to secure the livestock. Then came a terrible cracking sound. Thomas looked upward. Part of the barn roof was beginning to collapse. "Anna." She turned. "Get out." They ran. A large section of the roof crashed down behind them. Thomas grabbed Anna and pulled her clear. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Anna laughed nervously. Thomas stared at her. "What? We're still alive." Thomas shook his head. "You're impossible. And you're stubborn." Despite the storm, Thomas smiled. They returned to the house before dawn. Emily was asleep beside the fireplace. Thomas knelt beside her. Her fever was gone. Anna watched from the doorway. Thomas looked back at her. "Thank you." Anna smiled. "You don't have to thank me." "I do." The storm lasted another 2 days. When it finally passed, the ranch looked almost unrecognizable. The barn had suffered heavy damage. Fences were buried. Several cattle were missing. Food supplies were dangerously low. Thomas walked across the property in silence. He felt defeated. Then Anna pointed toward the distant hills. "Wait." Thomas looked where she was pointing. There were tracks in the snow. Not cattle tracks. Horse tracks. Thomas followed them toward the northern valley. There, sheltered between 2 rocky hills, he found several of his missing cattle. They were alive. Thomas stared in disbelief. "How did they get here?" Anna smiled. "They followed the old trail." Thomas looked at her. "What old trail?" "I saw it when I was checking the northern fence." Thomas remembered. Years ago, his father had used that trail during harsh winters, but it had been forgotten. They brought the cattle home. Those animals might be enough to keep the ranch alive. That afternoon, Thomas discovered something else near the broken fence. A piece of dark cloth was caught on a splintered post. He recognized it immediately. One of Caleb Dawson's hired men wore a coat made from the same material. Thomas clenched the cloth in his hand. Now he had proof. Caleb had been sabotaging the ranch. But Thomas knew proof would mean little unless someone was willing to stand against him. So he rode into town. Anna begged him to be careful. Thomas looked at Emily, then at Anna. "I'll come back." Emily ran to him and hugged his waist. "You better." Thomas smiled. "I will." In town, Thomas confronted Caleb in front of several ranchers. Caleb laughed when he saw the piece of cloth. "You think that proves anything?" Thomas placed it on the table. "No." He looked around the room. "But I think his confession will." Caleb's smile disappeared. A moment later, one of Caleb's hired men entered the room. His face was pale. Thomas recognized him. The man looked at Caleb, then at the other ranchers. Finally, he lowered his head. "He told me to do it." Silence filled the room. Caleb stood. "You worthless fool." The man continued. "He told me to damage Reed's fences, open his gates, make his cattle disappear." Thomas stared at Caleb. "Why?" The man answered. "He wanted Reed desperate enough to sell." Several ranchers exchanged looks. They had all heard similar stories. Caleb had been buying land from desperate families for years. But now everyone knew the truth. Caleb's scheme collapsed almost overnight. Without the town's support, he could no longer pressure Thomas into selling. But the ranch still had a debt, and winter was not over. Thomas returned home carrying the good news. Emily ran outside. "Did we win?" Thomas smiled. "Not yet." Anna looked at him. "What do we have left?" Thomas explained the situation. They had cattle. They had some food. But the debt remained. Anna thought for a moment. "What about the old trail?" Thomas frowned. "What about it?" "It connects to the trading road." Thomas stared at her. The old trail had been abandoned for years because snow often blocked it. "But if we clear it," Anna continued, "you could take the cattle to market before spring." Thomas considered the idea. It was dangerous. It would require work, but it might save the ranch. So they began. Thomas and Anna worked alongside several neighboring ranchers who had also suffered under Caleb's greed. They cleared snow, removed fallen trees, repaired sections of the trail. For days, they worked from sunrise until dark. Emily helped in her own way. She carried small bundles of firewood. She brought water. She even helped Anna prepare food for the workers. Slowly, the trail opened. When spring finally began appearing on the horizon, Thomas drove the surviving cattle toward the market. The sale was enough. Not to make him rich, Not even close. But enough to pay the debt. Enough to keep the ranch. Enough to stay. Thomas returned home late one evening. The snow had begun melting from the roof. Water dripped from the eaves. For the first time in months, the ranch smelled like spring. Emily ran toward him. "We're staying." Thomas laughed. "Yes." Anna stood behind her. Thomas looked at her. There was something different in his expression. Anna noticed. "What?" Thomas stepped closer. "When you came here, you asked me to let you stay." Anna smiled. "You needed someone to care for Emily." "I did. And she doesn't need me anymore." Emily immediately protested. "Yes, I do." Anna laughed. Thomas smiled. No, he looked directly at Anna. "She doesn't need you in the way she did then." Anna's smile faded. Thomas continued. "But I do." Anna stared at him. "You mean?" "I mean you don't have to stay because you feel sorry for us." Anna's eyes filled with tears. "I don't." "Good." Thomas took a breath. "Because I don't want you to leave." Anna looked down. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Emily stepped between them and took one of Anna's hands and one of Thomas's. "You both talk too much." They laughed. The three of them walked toward the house together. The ranch had survived the winter. But the greatest thing they had saved was not the land, it was the family they had unexpectedly become. Thomas had entered the winter believing he had to carry everything alone. Anna had arrived believing she had nowhere to belong. Emily had entered the season carrying a grief too large for a child, by spring. All three had changed. Thomas had learned to trust again. Anna had found a home, and Emily had learned that losing one person did not mean she had to lose love forever. Years later, Thomas would still remember the night Anna first appeared at his door. She had been cold, frightened, and nearly frozen. She had asked for nothing except a place to stay. And with only a few words, "Let me stay. I'll care for your daughter." She had unknowingly changed the fate of the entire Reed family. The ranch survived because Thomas agreed to open the door, but the family survived because Anna never stopped caring after she walked through it.